Hey everyone, I am so excited to be here today. My name is Marisol Bello, and I'm the Comms Director for Community Change and Community Change Action. Our usual host, Dorian Warren, usual host for People Are the Economy, is out today. So I am filling in, and I'm just excited, so excited to join today because we're going to be talking about one of my absolute favorite topics, which is storytelling and using storytelling and its impact on organizing. And so I'm here today with three of my favorite storytellers, but I wanted to first talk a little bit about storytelling and how important it is to us. As people, as humans, storytelling is really how we make sense of the world, right? And for us, for organizing and our movement building, to quote Hamilton, who tells your story matters, right? And at Community Change, we tell stories in every aspect of our work, right? And it's how we organize. It's why we started our Communications Fellows program 5 years ago, to really center the people who are most impacted by issues of economic, social, and racial justice, and so that they can lead in telling their own stories. And we'll have some of them on today as well. So we're really excited about that. But when we think about our stories and owning and leading in the stories, in our own stories, it also is a powerful tool to help us combat many of the narratives that we see today. I mean, think about the headlines that bombard your screens and our news feeds every single day. I mean, think about the news stories and headlines, in journalism, and I was a former journalist. There's always this saying of journalism being the first draft of history, right? And so, when you look at the headlines and the coverage of the world that we're living in today, how these stories are told matters. I mean, think about recently the headlines to the headlines of the arrest of the governor in Michigan, right? Instead of calling these folks domestic terrorists, we're hearing about them being referred to as militias, right? Since June, we keep hearing stories about protests related to Black Lives Matter as riots, and we keep hearing about violence, right? But all the images are paired with peaceful protesters gathering, really, under their First Amendment, all of our First Amendment rights to gather and raise our voices. And so the violence there is often by instigators, and we see often that that's not being framed in that kind of way. And not too long ago we saw headlines about the first time that we had domestic terrorism in American history is 9/11. But for many of our communities, especially in our Black and Brown communities, we know about domestic terrorism, and we don't have to look too far to remember and learn about and know about the lynchings that happen, or even the modern day police brutality and violence that's happening. And so we're thinking about, we living in America with different stories, different truths, and so as a result of that, our partners, our organizers, our movement leaders, we're all embracing story because we see how important it is in the narratives, and in our stories. We're recognizing that the narratives that we tell matter. They impact each other, how we see each other. They impact our value, and so it's so important for all of us to own our stories and be a part of that story, and tell our stories. And so today, I'm excited to welcome three incredible storytellers to talk a little bit about this. So how about we start off with my very dear good friend, Wendi Thomas, who is, hi, Wendy.
Hey.
Wendy is a journalist extraordinaire, my very, very good friend. She is the editor, publisher, founder of MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism. It's a nonprofit newsroom she started several years ago in Memphis that's focused on poverty, power, and public policy. She is one of our original communications fellows at Community Change, our OG. So I'm so excited always to be in any space where I could be with Wendy. Wendy is also the 2020 Selden Ring Award winner for investigative reporting, and she won first place in the Association of Healthcare Journalists in 2019 for a powerful series that she did with ProPublica called Profiting from the Poor. It was an investigation that really looked at how nonprofit hospitals were charging their employees who worked hourly wages, and how they were taking them to court for unpaid bills, unpaid medical bills. And Wendy's reporting changed all of that, and changed how the hospitals in Memphis were doing this. And it's just been an incredible story. So I'm so happy to have you on here today, my friend. And then we're also being joined by another great friend and powerful communicator and organizer, and she could talk about being a communicanizer. She has the language on this, JaNaé Bates, who's a communications director for Faith in Minnesota, one of our partners. Welcome, JaNaé.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Thank you so much. And JaNaé, as a communications director for Faith in Minnesota, it's an organization that aims to bring people of faith together to create people-centered politics in Minnesota. JaNaé is a Fulbright scholar, a minister, a former journalist, a senior editor of PR Newswire's Cleveland branch, and an activist who organized in Ohio before moving to St. Paul. And we are so excited to have JaNaé with us. And then we are also welcoming one of our communications fellows, Reverend Dr. Willie Francois III, who recently became a doctor, PhD doctor. So welcome, Willie. We're so excited to have you here.
My joy, my joy.
And Willie is a senior pastor of Mount Zion Baptist Church in Pleasantville, New Jersey. He's also the president of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality. As a communications fellow, and through his pastoral activism, his work really centers on racial equity and economic justice and criminal justice reform. So we are super, super excited to have him here today. So how about we just jump in? Wendy, how about we start with you, and you can talk to us a little bit about your journalistic experience. If you can talk a little bit about creating spaces and places for the truth, right? Rooting out the truth and really showing our communities sources that they can trust, but also having them be sources in the truth, right? Which so often we don't see as much, that we are sources as well. So can you talk a little bit about how you center that and do that at MLK 50?
Absolutely. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. So in 2017, I, after working for 25 years in daily newspapers, started a news organization here in Memphis, Tennessee, MLK 50 Justice Through Journalism. And as our name implies, we do see journalism as a tool to pursue justice. This has been an incredible 3.5-year stretch now, in which we have had an opportunity to build a team that looks like Memphis, which is majority people of color, majority of women, and really center the people that Dr. King would be aligned with were he still alive. We have a really good rapport with organizers, with activists, with people who are struggling to make ends meet, because we center them in our coverage, and we're very intentional about doing that. It is not always the easiest work to do. When people ask me what is my dream, what is my vision, I'll say to dismantle the status quo where it's not in service of Black and brown people and people who are struggling to make ends meet. And often the people who have money to give and to support these kind of organizations profit from the status quo. So understandably, they're not going to give us money to dismantle it, but we are not dissuaded at all, and very grateful that Community Change has been a supporter from the very beginning. from the very beginning when this was really just a dream. And it's a wonderful moment and a very important moment to be doing this kind of work with journalism in our nation.
Wendy, thank you so much. And the work has been just extraordinarily powerful. And I think it also makes a really strong case for why we have to have these kinds of stories in journalism, right? And the voices and also stories. And I think the great thing about having the three of you on here today is that you are doing storytelling in different platforms in different ways, which is just so important. And I'm wondering, JaNaé, because you are doing storytelling for organizing, right? You are organizing people through the work that you're doing in Faith in Minnesota. Can you talk a little bit about how you're doing it and how it's been impactful for your work?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of Wendy, like knowing as myself as a former journalist, knowing how important storytelling is, how important it is to have a firm public narrative so that we're not accidentally reinforcing oppositional narrative. And so at Faith in Minnesota, we have embodied something called the race class narrative, which is a framework in which people, our leaders, our thousands of leaders across the state of Minnesota, can tell their own stories in a way that actually empowers them and empowers those who hear it. Because we know that way too often stories are told for us and about us, and they're usually taken, it's like take the big sad story and turn it into pity porn, right? And so what we want to do is actually turn our pain into power. And so it gives us a structure in which we can talk about what our values are, be able to talk about the villains who have violated our values in the way that we don't see it manifest today, and be able to cast a big, bold vision about what we can have together. And so our leaders have gotten into a pretty consistent and thorough way of being able to tell their own stories like that so that we make more possible here in Minnesota.
That's so important to talk about that, right? Because what we're talking about here is being able to own our stories and being leaders in our own stories, because so often the narrative is that our stories, our voices, our experiences are not really centered as important. And so really looking at the different ways that we're doing that. And I'm curious, JaNaé, as a kind of follow-up to that, I mean, how are you seeing people sharing their stories? Wendy talked about clearly having a journalistic platform. In your case, in the work that you're doing, how is that being shared out?
Yeah, so we're having leaders do this through social posts, so leveraging their own social media accounts, writing letters to the editor, they're doing speaking engagements, they're talking to press and doing these interviews. So it's not always just like me as a spokesperson of the organization, but our leaders and their stories being told. And a huge reason why we do this is because I'm a person that's not a fan of like talking points. And it's mainly because it would then assume that I am the expert of their experience, which I am not. They are. So again, it's why this framework has been really useful. And also, amidst the pandemic, amidst COVID-19, a lot of folks have understandably had to restructure the way that they do things. And one of the silver linings of this pandemic has been this necessity to create ingenuity. And so we have been able to reach thousands and thousands of leaders since March and train them up to use this platform. And they've been doing it in really beautiful and amazing ways.
And also, JaNaé, can you talk a little bit about the race class narrative? Where can folks who are interested in really kind of digging into what that is and what that looks like, where can they find that?
Yes. So you should absolutely go visit raceclassnarrativeaction.com. So raceclassnarrativeaction.com, and it'll give you all of the background and tools that we have been creating and generating over time. It also will give you a lot of beautiful videos that are open source and you're able to share, and just like the amazing ways in which this research has been implemented, again, to like center folks of color, to center Black, Latinx, Indigenous, women, queer folk, like in ways that we haven't been able to in the past.
That's really helpful. And I am remiss because I also should have said that folks need to go to mlk50.com. If you want to know what's happening, you want to know like what the water cooler conversation is in Tennessee and in the South, please go there as well. And I should have said that right after, so I'm sorry I didn't. But thank you both. And we're going to jump into Willie in a moment. But first, I also wanted to just note when we talk about sort of how we are getting creative around things, we also had another communications fellow who is a poet and a strong storyteller in North Carolina that we wanted to join us as well to talk a little bit about storytelling, but she wasn't able to join us. Her name is Ayana Albertson, but she is, speaking of creative, joining us through a video. She's an award-winning poet and has just been really looking at new ways to share stories and reach out to folks. And so we wanted to first share her video. How about we take a listen?
Hi everyone, my name is Ayana Albertson. I'm 27 years old, a writer, a poet, and overall creative person. I'm just here to quickly speak with you all about the importance of storytelling, creative storytelling, and utilizing social media in order to push that messaging. As a poet, I understand the importance of having a message, right? And being able to not only convey that message, but also be able to be appealing and captivating. And I think something that's important about storytelling, especially when it comes to things that are our core values, like social justice, like women's rights, like equity and racial equality. It's important not only to be able to tell people about this, but tell it to them in a way that is not only clever, but creative and appealing. Over the quarantine during the pandemic, earlier in the year, I became pretty privy to TikTok, and I quickly realized how powerful of a tool this could be. It transcends generations. You have older folks, you have younger kids, and it's like, why not utilize this social media platform as a way to send that messaging? You know, why not do a little dance on TikTok and then also tell people how important it is to fill out the census? Why not upload a video with the most viral song and also tell people how important it is to go vote? You have to meet people where they are. You have to meet people where they are. And just understanding that it can also be fun. It doesn't have to be mundane. It doesn't have to be monotonous. It doesn't have to be cliche. But it is important that we get the messaging out, that we are able to convey and offer concise and clear messaging and delivery. But it can be so much fun. It can be creative. And that's definitely something that I hold to be part of my method, is just making sure that I can reach people who may not typically go to a town hall meeting, you know, those people who don't really have the sheer will to just do their own research. Why can't I meet them in a more creative way and something that's more unique and extraordinary? And that's how we are able to get to those people and able to successfully teach and inform. And I think it's so important. So it's something we should continue to do, and we just have to do it.
I'm so excited that I was going to start talking to her right now. I'm so excited to have her. She is like our resident queen of TikTok, just like everything out there. She's just fabulous, and so excited to have her and Willie here today. Willie, who we just absolutely love, is one of our communications fellows, and you just heard Ayana talking, Willie, and I'm curious, from your perspective, how you've had to be creative in your storytelling, especially with COVID. I mean, I know because I read your stuff and I love it, but maybe you could talk to us a little bit about, just some of your examples of how you've been doing this.
Good. It's great to be here. Great to be a part of this team today. I think it's always important to sort of name how we're like constantly living in stories. So stories are not just what we tell, but we actually like live in them. And when I think about living in stories, I'm talking about they're the stories that the world tells us about us, and then the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves that tend to be anti-us. And particularly, living through this pandemic and being forced to produce and being forced to continue to create, it's actually been harder to to think outside of these dominant narratives that are often told to us and sometimes by us, that are actually anti us. And some of the work, and so like just being honest about the kind of funk that I sort of fell into at the beginning of this experience, because storytelling is really, it's about people making, but it's also about like relationship making. And so being distant from people, the assumption was that I was losing something. I was losing something very human. I was losing something that is, deeply narrative, but deeply embodied, by not being able to be with people. And so it took a while to sort of overcome and crawl out of that box that I had like fallen into. But it's so the answer of like being creative, it has forced me to not just see my writing as a form of storytelling, but also seeing the creation of memes and the creation of videos as a different form of my own storytelling. Because one of the gifts of being a community change fellow has really been digging into my community, really immersing myself in my congregation and the areas around my congregation, just searching for stories and hearing these stories that really remind us just how much these stories are not just stories of self, but they're really stories of us. Like even telling my own particular story and thinking about my own experiences with poverty as a child, that these really are not just stories of self, but they are stories of self, but they really are stories of us, and the way the human experience finds its greatest vent, finds its greatest peak when we are actually willing to tell our stories in ways that are vulnerable, in ways that are authentic, and also ways that cause trouble, right? And I think that I think that I've been able to reclaim this sense of storytelling as good troublemaking, to borrow the phrase of our new ancestor, John Lewis, storytelling as good troublemaking, because stories are so universal, and because the way social media has allowed us to continue to tell stories and stay connected is that I have been able to find and nurture community just by sharing in ways that are vulnerable, sharing in ways that are authentic, that seem to be ways that are also challenging.
No, that's so great. And I just think it's so powerful when you talk about the stories about us. And then you mentioned, sort of the anti-narrative as well, which continues to point to the reason why it's so important that we own our narratives and our stories, right? And you also had some good news recently. Am I wrong?
Yeah. I just settled on a publisher for my next book. Really excited about that because it really leans into some of these things that we're talking about what does it mean to tell our stories in authentic ways, in vulnerable ways that actually challenge the dominant narratives that we're living in. I mean, so often as a person, as a non-white person who surely benefits from male privilege, surely benefits from particular types of class privilege, but they're and I don't always know how to allow my stories of privilege to live alongside my stories of disadvantage and my stories of oppression. But to be able to tell that fuller story about myself, and when we all learn how to tell our fuller stories, like that is a form of protest. That is a form of resistance to narratives that like to flatten what it means to be human, flatten what it means to be Black, flatten what it means to be a Black man. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about this book because it honors that speech and storytelling is actually action itself, right? It's the first step of resistance to, all of the hegemonic structures that are constantly trying to tell us who we are, trying to flatten who we are, and just the capacity to be able to own the discomfort of my full narrative and to create discomfort for people who have power by telling my full narrative, I think is that first step of how we transform our communities, by harvesting the power of telling on ourselves, right? So being able to tell the story of my own privilege and my own disadvantage in ways that create discomfort in other folk causes us to start telling on ourselves in ways that hopefully transform our homes, then transform our communities, and then maybe even transform our democracy.
And just like snapping all over the place. I'm doing all of this stuff. I just like so powerful, Willie. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the book. I'm ready to like sign up for the Amazon to get myself on whatever wherever the book is going to be published. I'm ready to go there with you. And then I'm curious, Wendy. Well, Willie was just talking a little bit about sort of how he is trying to find stories, where he's finding stories, and certainly the challenges early on. I mean, how Willie tells stories is so often through video and writing op-eds and those kinds of things. But for your space as a journalist, how have you been finding those stories, especially in this time of social distance, when you do have to be more creative about making sure that the voices and the people that you're centering in your stories are there? What have you been doing? Oh, Wendy.
Okay. Yeah, so it has been more challenging to connect with sources during the pandemic. At the beginning of the year, I started doing some reporting around the warehouse industry here and those workers, a lot of whom are temp workers. And so, I'd hired some folks to help me, and they were, riding bus routes, hanging out at bus stops. We were outside some large warehouses at shift change, and now it's not safe to do any of those things. And I'm not asking anybody on my team to go places that I would be uncomfortable going. And so these people, a lot of these low wage workers, they're not unionized, right? So that's not a place that we can go to. They're often not connected in any meaningful way. And so it's required a lot of social media sleuthing to try to connect to people. One of the things we did early on when the pandemic began, or really kind of picked up steam here in Memphis, is we knew that workers were struggling to make ends meet. People were being laid off, the hours being cut, furloughed, and we decided to honor their stories and pay them for contributing those stories. And so we solicited workers. We did like a Google form online and asked people to tell us, how have you been impacted financially by the pandemic? And so we got dozens and dozens of stories. And then we would pair those workers with an editor. I mean, we still have our editorial standards, right? We still have to verify that what they're telling us is true. And we paid them $200 for those essays. And it was a way to amplify their voices. Again, when we're thinking about this first draft of history, who are we purposely including? And we have this repository now of, however many stories of workers and how they were getting by. And we also put some money in their pockets, which was important for us to be able to do.
No, that's great. I mean, you're one of the things that I just admire so much about what MLK50. There's so much to admire because Wendy is kicking ass and taking names. Could I say that? I guess on our Facebook Live, I don't know, but she really is. She's amazing. She's awesome, and really shaking up the status quo in so many ways. I mean, I wanted to just lift up a few of the things from the reporting. I mean, when I read the piece about the hospitals. Just so that you all who are listening and watching, you should know that Wendy's reporting, as a result of Wendy's reporting, it erased almost $12 million in medical debt for patients that were being sued for unpaid debt, but who are struggling to get by. And because of Wendy's reporting, it eliminated $12 million worth of debt, medical debt for all of those families. Her reporting, again, helped increase wages for the lowest paid minimum wage workers at the hospitals, which, again, it's powerful stuff. I mean, she's, and even outside of the hospitals, right, the work that she's done on records that, different county commissions wanted to keep private, like the crime commission in Shelby County.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? Shined a light on the fact that they didn't want to share records. And she's just been leading in so much of the conversation that happens in Memphis around the things that are impacting people every single day, having the voices of the people that are most impacted, their voices being heard. And I was curious, Willie, because coming from a space where you are not a traditional journalist, but through all of our work together, right, learning, really kind of digging into the tools of what it means to be a storyteller using journalistic practices, but not being a formally trained journalist. Can you talk a little bit about what that has been like in terms of your storytelling? And I'm thinking of the video of George Floyd, as part of what we're talking about. That was taken by a non-journalist and shown, and then it just jumped. So can you just kind of talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a significant power to, quote unquote, citizen journalism. The idea that people who are just a part of the fabric of local communities are able to tell those stories and to expose really how these communities have been abandoned in their own voice, in their own face. Now, I think that's one of the gifts of technological advancement, is that it really does put the power of the press in some ways in all of our hands, in all of our reaches, which I think is powerful, considering how the press is so often demonized, particularly in this moment. The press is supposed to protect democracy, and it's really being demonized by so much of our world on all sides of the political spectrum. But there is a power that we all have as residents of this country, as people who live here, that we actually do get to share our own stories, share our own experiences, and vent our own lives. I think that's one of the gifts that I've learned as a pastor. I've always seen churches as like incubators of revolution, but I'm learning more and more that churches are revolutionary because they're really repositories of human experience, repositories of human stories. Churches are spaces where the human story is centered as sacred. At least that's what I like to think, right? And to the point of George Floyd, like that, the fact that the nation watched 8+ minutes of an amateur video of a lynching, and this amateur video of a lynching, for at least a moment, pricked the heart of a nation. It convicted pockets of this nation in real ways, and I think that it's important to be able to talk about that to not just talk about it, to frame that and label that as some of the highest form of storytelling we have. Like, we wouldn't have seen the death of Eric Garner without it. We wouldn't have been able to see the way people like Walter Scott were treated as target practice by police officers without this. People could possibly be in jail right now by simply bird watching in Central Park if it wasn't for the power that we all have now to capture story and to tell story in that way.
And that's so important. And as you were talking, Willie, one of the things that I was thinking about was this idea that story, especially we saw this summer with the killing of George Floyd, it has led us to hard truths and to have conversations about hard truths. It's led us in this summer, certainly, around a reckoning that so many in our communities already know, but to a wider nation that sometimes wants to ignore it or thinks of it as a different kind of narrative. Just the storytelling that we were seeing has led to that. And I'm curious, JaNaé, from your perspective, how we do this, right? How do we have more honest conversations with ourselves through our, we strive for this honest, truthful storytelling. How do we how do we do that, right? With our in conversation with the people that we know and love, and we certainly are leading into a period of time in 3 weeks. Do I have my time wrong? Where truth telling is really important right now. Would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, so as Faith in Minnesota is in the thick of this, right? Both with the racial uprising, of course, with the killing of George Floyd, being in a pandemic, recognizing that the country, the nation, the world is going through a major shift, and that we want to lean into this. Sometimes we have this idea that we want to lean into this idea of normal, and that there's no going back to like normal as we knew it. We don't want that. It didn't work for the majority of us, right? And so we can't have a nostalgia about it. And so what we've been doing at Faith in Minnesota, and what I know organizations have been doing across this country, is talking to people, having these like truth-telling conversations about where we are, why we're here, right? And then what we can actually have moving forward, that the normal that we can co-create together is far brighter, a far better future. It is about us working across race and region and religion to get there, but that it's actually possible. And we've seen glimmers of it. And so, here in Minnesota, we're one of the very few states, if only right now, that has a split chamber, which meaning like our Senate is Republican ran and our House is Democratic ran. And so what has, telling the truth about the fact that we don't have a statewide paid family medical leave because the Republican Senate has blocked it over and over and over again. Telling the truth about why healthcare has been squelched by the Republican Party here. Telling the truth about why all of the things that could actually make us resilient in the midst of a pandemic, could make it possible for police not to kill us every day, has been blocked by a handful of Republicans. And that, the House has passed sweeping reforms and sweeping legislation that would actually heal these things. And that means we can have it, right? And so this is an opportunity for us to actually tell the truth about, breaking through the cynicism, because a lot of people think, well, politics don't work, it's all broken, it's rigged, blah, blah, blah. It's only rigged because we haven't lifted up our voices and used our people power to create something different. And what we've seen since the killing of George Floyd, what we've seen since this pandemic, is that when we come together, we make stuff happen, and it happens quickly, right? Like here in Minnesota, we were able to deplete our jail population in our largest county by 40%, almost overnight, because of a pandemic, where we're told over and over again, that can't happen, we can't do it. Oh, turns out we can do it, And so we at Faith in Minnesota have actually launched the largest relational voter program in the state, where we are talking to hundreds and thousands. We're having hundreds and thousands of conversations with Minnesotans, and it is really centered with Black folks and Muslim folks, because often we're not talked to, except maybe the week before an election. And we've been talking to people since March. And so barbershops and Black Congregation Cooperative, as well as the Muslim Coalition of Faith in Minnesota, has been doing amazing work. I mean, we just had a leader who had 600 conversations in one day, on the phone, through text, out canvassing, hanging outside of grocery stores, making sure people are registered to vote, ready to vote, already voted. It's a beautiful thing to be able to see this kind of change.
It's so amazing. And relational organizing, just as a recap, I know everyone on this call knows, and I'm sure many of our viewers also, but it's really it's really organizing your friends and family, like all the people all the people you were connected with, all the people in your congregation, all the people that you went to high school with, people from down the block. It's like everybody that because you're more likely to listen to your friends and family than anybody else, right?
That's absolutely.
No, you guys are doing just amazing work in Minnesota, and it's so important. It's this time has been just so wonderful. And as we start to think about closing out, I have a question for all three of you. What is your number one advice for everybody who's watching and wants to, like, because I know all of you will, as soon as you turn off, you're going to become storytellers, yay team. And so what is your advice to folks that are watching and listening who want to become storytellers? What is your advice to them, number one? And number two, and secondly, how can they connect to what's your advice for them connecting to the work that each of you are doing? I'll start with Minister Bates.
Well, if you are in the state of Minnesota, you should most certainly be connected to Faith in Minnesota, because again, we organize people of faith and of none. We also organize 200 childcare centers, barbershops. So please get connected. And if you're not in Minnesota, get connected to an organization that is focused on racial and economic equity, and most certainly relational organizing. It is a way to give yourself some joy in the drudgery of this, but also to have real impact. And I would say just my last little tidbit is just to remember that, like, we were all created beings for this moment, for this time. Like, it is not an accident that we are here in this arena. And so as a person of faith, as a Christian myself, I recognize that when my day is done, I have to stand before my maker, and I need to have a good answer about what I did in 2020. And I feel like, and I know that all of us need to do that as well. And so I would just say to lean into what your own call, purpose, mission is in this time.
Wonderful. Thank you, JaNaé. Willie, what do you think? What's your advice?
So my first piece of advice is just thinking about the power of story, is that your courage to show up and your courage to be introspective is revolutionary, particularly in a time where we are all being boxed in and we're all being mislabeled. Is that the first step is really owning your full story, leaning into immersing yourself in all of the intersections that are you, and just being courageous about sharing that, because that's a part of human connection making, and that's also our opportunity to let each other know that we're not alone. The second piece is, I think that in this, if this election goes the way justice and racial equity and criminal justice reform needs this election to go, is that we really have to think about how storytelling is really going to help us live out co-governance. And we're going to have to do something that we haven't done in a while, and that is actually hold our parties, our politicians, the people we support accountable for what they said. And there are so many ways that we have an opportunity to make policy personal. Reminding ourselves that a bill can determine what's in my wallet. A bill determines what's in my refrigerator. Legislation determines what access I have to food. Legislation determines how safely I can walk down the street with a hoodie and with my pants sagging if I want to do that. Those things are policy related. And so we have to be able to tell how policy affects our personal lives. And I think the more we do that, the more pressure we can put on people who seemingly have power. But we're going to have to use our stories and use our experiences to hold our politicians, our elected officials accountable. And so that's the work we've been trying to do during this election cycle, is to be clear that we're not just talking about healthcare for the sake of healthcare. We're talking about what does it mean to really be denied by pre-existing conditions, because we have family members in the past who actually lived out that reality. What does it mean to not have food because SNAP is being cut by particular parties? Like, we need to tell our stories about those disadvantages and that type of disinheritance, because that is how we're going to continue to put pressure, not just on the people we consider our political opposition, but that's how we're going to put pressure on the people that we're actually voting for and who claim to be on our side.
And Willie, thank you so much. And Willie, what's the best way for folks to get connected to your work?
Go to theblackchurchcenter.net. No, theblackchurch.net, and you'll see what the Black Church Center is doing there. And if you want to read stuff that I write, you can go to Twitter, and my Twitter handle is right here, Willie Francois 3.
All right, super. And Wendy, last but not least, you are a decorated journalist. You have been a storyteller for a long time. What is your main piece of advice? And then also tell us how best to connect with MLK 50 and your work.
Yeah, so over the years, I've mentored dozens and dozens of young writers, and I tell them the way to become a better writer is to write. So I think the same advice is true for storytellers. The way to become more comfortable with telling your story is to tell it and to continue to tell it. And, own your right to take up space in the narrative, and don't be timid, to be bold, I think as Willie said. To get in touch with us, you can, of course, go to mlk50.com. All our social icons are there, and you can follow us. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I'm also a very prolific tweeter, so feel free to follow me at Wendi, WENDI_C_Thomas. Reading our work, sharing our work, interacting with us on social media all helps the cause. And so it's not just money we're
Money
looking for.
helps.
We also
reader for everyone watching, all three of the orgs here. Money helps. That's a good way to support.
Money helps. But we also want to build relationships with our audience and our readers and our communities.
This has just been an absolute pleasure and a joy for me. I cannot tell you how excited I am to talk with three of my favorite storytellers about my favorite topic in the whole wide world. So thank you all for joining. And so in closing, for everyone who's watching us, we want to continue to hear from you at home. For those of you that are watching on Facebook and YouTube, please share your stories with us. We want to hear your stories. Be storytellers with us. Your stories are the stories that are strong. They create connections for us, and they help us all see the world through others' eyes and help to spark action. And so, just, we've said it so much during our 45 minutes together, but that our stories matter, right? Our stories are interconnected. We need each other, all of us speaking out loud and clear. You can sign up for some easy actions now, since we are all here. For those of you that are watching, if you've already registered to vote, and if you haven't, please vote early. Just go out there. The voting is right now one of the strongest way that we can make our voices heard. Make a plan to vote, right? If it's in person, if it's by mail, where you're dropping it off. Don't forget to put your ballot in the secrecy sleeve, because not every state is going to count it. I luckily live in a place, Washington, D.C., where they will count it, but not every place does. Please read the instructions. Remember to follow each step as you go, and that's really important. Talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors, the people down the way, the people in the supermarket, everybody you run into. Let them know you got to vote. We got to raise our voices. And so I hope that all of you know and see how much passion each of us brings to storytelling, and how valuable and how important a tool it is for organizing, because each of us is the owner of our story, and it's really the only way we can connect with one another. It is such a strong way for us to connect with each other and make the change we want to see in the world. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And thank you, my friends, for joining today.